Called Trevor James Tukurua. I'm a resource scientist at Tasman District Council. I've got a little bit of time to make up. But at the lunch break, I was asked, or the comment was made, I've spent all this money on my farm, was it really worth it? And I guess without monitoring on your particular farm, it's very difficult to answer that question. But I've got a case study here in one stream in Golden Bay, which I hope to illustrate that. Yes, it is worth it, but it may not be what you first think. So this farmer had done a lot of work fencing the streams. All the crossings were very seldom used. You'd go as far as saying this was an exemplar catchment. And for most of the time, for most of the time we went on that farm, it was like, what's going on here? We're getting spikes in our data, but it looks like one of the best farms in the district. Then, as our monitoring went on, we actually, and walking on the farm more and more, we got a sense of some intermittent issues with fecal discharges. And of course, it's often you think, oh well, those discharges are there only maybe for a few weeks, and then they're gone, and that should be the end of it. But no, these fecal microbes get stored within the sediments and get bled off into the water column for a long time afterwards. This example of a photograph in the buller is I see it more and more with farmers fencing off and leaving a rank grass or other vegetation through these swales. This is not a stream, this is just a swale, which would otherwise just, the stormwater would run off and into, in this case, the Buller River nearby. So like many other catchments in the top of the south, our main issues are with our small creeks. So the small creeks often have really high biodiversity as well, so very important in those values. Often it's temperature and dissolved oxygen, there's invertebrates, filamentous green algae, but disease-causing organisms do make a feature here as well. And we've got some photos here. Nearly all my photos are in the last 3 to 5 years, so really recent. But there's I'd like to say also is it worth it, that question. We've got far more trends in our data. I mentioned the 29 sites, our state of environment monitoring data, far more trends going in the improving direction than we have declining. And I think it's so much credit is due to farmers in that respect. I said that a couple of weeks ago at those farmer field days, and it really is true. But there's always those times when the ball gets dropped. Maybe we don't even realise that the ball is being dropped at these times, not just on farms, but on in urban areas as well. So this case study is the Tukurua stream, and I should have taken a nice photograph of the stream. It's beautifully covered in native bush, really high fish biodiversity. There's a campground there at the bottom of the catchment. A lot of the kids would swim there, particularly when the tide was way out at sea. It was about just over 100 metres inland from the mouth. That the children would swim. There's a lot of holiday homes and permanent residents within that corridor as well. So we've got human sources and we've got a significant farm. But the farm was not the main dairy platform. It was more of a runoff block. So I've got these as a handout because you can't see the details in there. Thank you. This is a poster that I put up for the Freshwater Sciences Society conference a couple of years ago. And we were initially triggered onto studying this catchment because of a norovirus outbreak at the campground back in 2010. It ended up that the source of that outbreak within the human community there was not from the stream, it was from practices within the kitchen and so forth within the campground. However, it did show us that we did have an issue in that catchment, and while yes, more monitoring would have been good and more of our catchments around the district, we found an issue, so we did get onto it, and ever since then it's been part of our bathing water monitoring program. And our bathing water monitoring program monitors sites from this time of year. We started last week through into March, and we do that pretty much at any time that people will swim. We've chosen not to sample today. Today was part of our program. Our rivers, like the Motueka River, was running at 240 cumex. That's really pushing hard. The river's pushing hard into willows. It really is unsafe. Peter mentioned about drowning risk and what have you. That is a reason not to sample, but otherwise we would be out there sampling. So with our river water quality monitoring sites, our 29 sites, we do that sampling at any flows. So what happened was we did our microbial source tracking that earlier speakers have talked about, and that raised most of well, both ruminant and human, and there was a little bit of wildfowl in there as well. So we initiated a septic tank survey of all, I think there was almost 20 properties there. 3 failing septic tanks were discovered as part of that. All 3 were required to upgrade, and the next set of microbial source tracking samples revealed no human markers were found. So yes, we've achieved that. It wasn't a naturalised source of E. coli necessarily for that, and levels still continued to carry on. So this was the 3 failing septic tanks were eliminated around here, but it's continued to have some spikes. Sorry, back to my spot. And then we found troughs here were a major source. That happened not once but twice. So in the back there is the stream, and so there's very little distance from the trough to the stream. This ponded area around, this is the same trough, looking at it from different sides. It was ponded significantly around the effluent that is builds up through that situation. The cattle are 50 times more likely to defecate when standing in water. So that trough was moved back 30 or so metres back from the stream, and I must say that I've got so much respect for this farmer. He really got on to the business really quickly once the issue was understood. And I guess that's the question, is when we understand the problems, and it's good to have examples like we've seen today that show that. So I said that if I go back, it happened again that there was a second event of a stock trough. So we got the first one early on, and then a second stock trough discharge, and the same issues. We had width and way out the trough was a major difference. Things came right for a while, but then there was a standoff area right near the top of the catchment, up in here, effluent building up, and then running off into the stream, which is just on the right of this picture here. So I guess the moral of this story is wherever effluent builds up, it's and will get into the waterway during a rainfall event. It will not only get in there at that time, the effect will be lasting over the rest of the season. However, the positive news is go back that we have stayed at these really low levels here for the last 2 years. Have continued in that vein. So I think that's well, I won't go as far as saying we've clinched the whole problem, because other problems may come up in the future. And it's a small catchment with only one farm and only 20 houses, so it was much easier for us to deal with it. But you can see the number of samples that we've taken, the effort that it's required even with such a small catchment. Okay, now I'm going to go through a couple of other projects. Richard Muirhead touched on the Aorere catchment project, a very successful project. They focused on the effluent and the overland flow here coming down into streams and the need for storage. These underpasses here going under the main road, and the effluent building up in those situations and then overflowing into the stream. So Peter showed similar photos. So this is just on over a culvert, this photo on the right. Again, effluent building up, and it's running off and into the waterway. It's intercepting those and making them go off into a swale, sort of a ponded area within long grass in a paddock. So one thing Richard didn't mention is that the collective action in that Aorere catchment showed that the harvest, they were only able to harvest about 30% of the time, and that's consistently now up above 60% of the time. So that is a big reason for success. The monitoring, the statistical analysis of that data is just on the cusp of being statistically significant. I mean, the data is showing a decrease when you eyeball it, and that's really, really good news. So a lot of those sources in that catchment were these races, stock access, and shared effluent. So here's a picture of a race where in rain, and it's running down the race and into a drain here and off down and into a stream. This farmer is out there intercepting these berms that build up on the side of the race. He's now making a cutout and letting all of this water that would otherwise go down and shortcut into the drain. He's making sure that is now draining off and into the paddocks. At least it gets filtered through the grass rather than going so direct to the waterways. These things really do make a difference, and it's just getting us all keyed into thinking about this when it rains. The Sherry catchment. Go back to the Aorere for a moment. There's some really good data there to show the expenditure. They put $1.6 million, I think it was, Barbara, into measures to improve the water quality there, and that amounted to a huge amount per farm. And you could say, yes, was it worth it? But I think it's certainly worth it for the downstream mussel farmers. It's certainly improved the water quality. There's no doubt about that, and it has been sustained. It's just looking at other issues that may pop up and keeping on top of it. I've got a couple of these. You may have seen these if they're getting on a little bit now, but NIWA produced these posters about stock crossings and also stock and waterways, the fencing issues. So maybe people can just pick them up from the table, unless people want to put their hands up for them. The Sherry River catchment. We've got two of the proponents of that catchment with us today, and I really do believe that so close to being there, but there are, if you go in it with a real focus on potential source or the critical source areas, you will find them, but you've got to keep looking over different seasons and times. So this is 3 years ago in the Motori catchment, where we've got the area has been used for winter grazing. That's all flown into this creek. You can see the red arrows here indicate the direction of flow in the stream, but all of that is flowed down off this whole area and straight into that drain. I got another photo of it here, closer up. one of the points where it funnels into the stream, and really that should be at least temporarily taped off to make sure that there is some good grassy swales for that to be filtered rather than heading straight in. Yes, that won't mitigate against a really high flow event, but 10 to 20 mils of rain over a few hours, it's probably going to do quite a lot of work. And remember that E. coli, those disease-causing organisms that go on over that event, they get into the stream and they continue to bleed off into the waterway. So it's not just about protecting, it's about trying to stop as much of it as you can practically do, but not to go to that expense for the very high flows, which are going to be cost masses to deal with, and we're not for a moment asking about that. So these are, in the last 3 years, we've had, we still do get these ephemeral waterways that stock get into. This was taken just a couple of years ago by aerial photograph. The stream running through the top here, cattle had access right through that, winter grazing, sheep as well. It's all, the water was flowing off this hillside down into this drain. The drain was going straight to the waterway. It's not the winter or the stock sort of holding area per se that's the problem. It's about the connection and the strong connectivity with that runoff with the drain and then into the waterway. So if we can break that connection, we're really in business. Some of these are disguised or concealed. Some of these gullies, particularly the Motri, they're nicely vegetated through here, which does help the ecology, but underneath you're finding them heavily pugged. So this is a sheep shearing shed. The solution in this was really easy. It had not been identified in previous farm plans because they'd always gone out in reasonably good weather conditions, and all this yard was dry and there was no evidence of any discharge. But during the rain, this water would come off the hillsides, wash right through the yard, and if that yard had been freshly used, like we saw in this photograph, it was washing straight into the waterway. Now, Bernard Simmons, who's our soil scientist and land sustainability officer, helped this farmer put, and the solution that was agreed to both parties was, instead of digging a drain to reroute the clean water around it, is to put it into a culvert underneath the yard. And straight away you've got the clean water not intercepting all of that fecal matter and the sediment and into the waterway. So we haven't got data for this particular critical source area, but I think it is really obvious. But you do have to come back in the right conditions. This is a statement that has been said by Richard and others as well. It's combined with the fine sediment. Some of these streams do have a lot of sediment in them, and it's a legacy from many decades and generations ago, but combined with high levels of sediment, the fecal load can be more sustained, and because it's protected in that environment. So that's me. But just before I finish this, there's a couple of little notes from others have mentioned about problem sites. The Waka Waka may have a naturalised population of E. coli. We think that might be the case with one of our problem bathing beach sites in Golden Bay, the Pahara Beach. It seems to be every big high tide, when the tide pushes up into the top of the beach and interacting with the woody debris and leaf matter and what have you, and algae, we get some really high spikes. So we are going to be doing a study with ESR to look, is that situation a problem for causing disease? Because if it's not, we should back right off and say, actually, well, one site there that is not actually the fecal indicator bacteria, in this case enterococci for the marine environment, is not fulfilling the role that we want, and so we may need to look at something else. But as Richard said, the vast majority of cases, E. coli, enterococci are definitely good indicators for their purpose. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your attention.